What is going on, guys? Gavin here, and today I am going to go over a couple test hands for the Djinn PK deck that I posted on the channel not too long ago. It was pretty successful. A lot of people seem to like the deck, so I figured why not show you guys some test hands. So the way this deck kind of functions, it's not really like something that's like a 1 or 2 card combo. It's more just like you play with what you have and kind of work with that instead of just like knowing and memorizing like the 1 and 2 card combos. So I just figured why not do test hands instead of like, combos, because I could go like over, every hand is going to play a little bit differently. So with that being said, there are some general trends that you can follow when you're playing this deck, so hopefully you can kind of pick up on some of those with the test hands that I'm about to show. But this is the deck list that I am rocking with. I did make a couple changes, but without any further ado, let's get into those test hands. Okay, so this hand, the first hand is actually really good. Basically, we have 4 summons, and 3 of them are free with like the E-Telly, the Silent Boots, and the Junk Forward. So to start, obviously, we're going to special summon the Junk Forward because it's only free when we have nothing else on the field. Then we'll normal summon the Conjurer and then E-Telly into another level 3, which will be the Psychic Wielder. And now we have 2 Earth level 3s, and we want to save our Dark one for potentially making Rusty. So because Rusty does care about attributes, whereas Cherubini does not. And we'll go ahead and link those off into the Cherubini. And then Cherubini can send a Phantom Knights card to the graveyard because we already have the Conjurer, right? So we can just go ahead and send like something like a Scales, or we could send the Cloak as well. It probably would have been better to send the Cloak here, just in case we do get interrupted. Cloak can still grab at something, whereas Torn Scales needs something else in the graveyard, so probably want to sequence that a little bit better next time. So we'll go into Rusty Bardiche and use Rusty Bardishe's effect to dump the Cloak. So now we have 2 Phantom Knights in the graveyard, and we have the Fogblade set, so we're already off to getting a really good board set up. So now we'll go ahead and activate the Cloak, and since we already have the boots in the hand, we can actually go ahead and grab the gloves, because gloves is great discard fodder off of the Torn Scales. So summon Scales, and Scales will dump the gloves and can send a Wings to the graveyard so that we can start kind of loading up the graveyard with traps so that we can actually use their effects to revive our Phantom Knights cards. So now we'll go ahead and special summon out the boots, and we can go into Leviair here. Leviair can summon back the Cloak in attack mode so that we can actually use this effect on Rusty and get that additional attack to the Rusty. I did not do that here yet. I guess I don't do that here, so that's something that you should definitely do. Maybe I do it later. I think I do it later, but probably just want to do it as soon as you can. So basically the name of the game here is to make the Leviairs so that you can kind of get your 3 Xyz monsters on the board. And so we'll go ahead and use the Cloak here now. Obviously should have used it sooner, but can't always remember the little things every single time. Then we'll go into Breaksword. So here, instead of going into Breaksword, you could go into Musa Rhythm. So the benefit of going into Breaksword here is that you actually, with the it works really well with the trap card. So if you can get both a Fogblade and a Wings, then what you can do is you can use both of them on your opponent's turn to revive Rusty and to revive Breaksword, so that you can revive Rusty first, and then Breaksword will be revived to the right arrow zone that Rusty will be pointing to. And then you can get a pop after your board has already been kind of broken, which is really good and wins a lot of games. So yeah, basically now here we are going to go into the Megaclops, and now we can go ahead and fetch that last Wings and set the Wings, and Wings can be activated whenever. And hopefully, you go for a Fogblade. If your opponent can't even play through 1 Fogblade, and if it's still sitting there, that's perfectly fine because you're going to be winning the game anyways. But if they do link off the monster that gets Fogbladed or whatnot, basically then you will have access to both the Wings and the Fogblade in the graveyard, so that you can actually use the Rusty and Breaksword combo that I said earlier before. Now, what's really strong about this too is that Megaclops obviously is unaffected, but will start netting you more advantage on your next turn once your opponent actually has stuff on the board, which is really good. And then we can obviously use Infernity Conjurer every single turn, and then we have plenty of gas here in the graveyard to just kind of go off really hard on our opponent's next turn. And we'll definitely be able to use Rusty effect next turn, even if it gets removed, because the trap cards as well. So that's kind of like the strength of this deck. Obviously, This deck doesn't really play through Nibiru. I know you guys are all thinking about it, but as Patrick Hoban says, I won't play a deck that doesn't lose to Nib. I thought that was hilarious when he was interviewing, or was being interviewed by Farfa. He said that. I'm like, what a Chad, honestly. So yeah, you're just going to lose to Nib with this deck, but there's not a whole lot you can do about that aside from just set your Fog Blades and Imperms and Chalices and kind of hope that's enough. But yeah, that's it for the first test hand. Let's go ahead and go into some more. Okay, so for this hand we have access to 3 summons, which is still full combo because these will get themselves out of our hand really easily because they both special summon themselves. So we are going to start by normal summoning the Cloak, and then we'll special summon the other 2 and then go directly into Cherubini. And since right here is actually where you kind of have to think a little bit, it can be a little bit tricky to decide what to send off a Cherubini, because sometimes you need Phantomites in the graveyard and you don't really have the luxury of going for dumping the Conjurer. Other times it's just fine to dump the Conjurer, so you kind of need to pay attention to whether you can actually empty out your hand or if you just are going to need the Phantomites further down the line in your graveyard. So that's where some of the decision making comes in, but in this case we'll be fine to just dump the Conjurer. Then we'll go into Rusty and then activate the Rusty effect to dump the Scales, set a Fog Blade, and now we can go ahead and banish the Cloak. Cloak can add a Gloves to hand because we will be able to summon out the Torn Scales, and Torn Scales will summon itself, and we can use the effect to dump the Gloves, which is just great discard fodder because it will be whatever we need it to be in the graveyard. And then now we can go ahead and empty out our hand by setting what's left in our hand. So we'll set the Wings and we'll set the Imperm. And now we'll be able to go for our first Leviair, and Leviair can actually bring back the Cloak, and Cloak can use its effect to give Rusty 800 attack. And then we will go for the Fog Blade to special summon back a Phantom Knight from the graveyard. And here we kind of just go for the Ragged Gloves to get a Wings into the graveyard so that we actually have a Phantom Knight to revive off of our next Leviair. So Leviair can activate, but before we do that, we'll go ahead and use the Boots. Or use the Wings to special summon out the Boots, and then we can go ahead and use Leviair here to get our last Xyz monster. So once again we'll go into Breaksword, and as I said before, you know, it really is up to you whether you want to go for Musa Rhythm. I forgot to say the upside of going for Musa Rhythm is that it gives you a better follow-up for next turn, because basically it allows you to go into Humming, which Humming will be able to revive the Musa Rhythm, and it will basically allow you to get 2 rank 3 Xyz monsters for the price of 1. So basically you'll be able to go for a Utopic Future and a Utopic Draco Future super easily, or it'll just make it that much easier to go into Megaclops. I am playing 2 Megaclops in this build just because I think Megaclops is a really fun card, and just having the second one is just really difficult for your opponent to out. And Megaclops is unaffected by monsters effects, but you know, it's obviously it's fair game for trap spells and Xyz monsters because it's actually not unaffected by Xyz monsters. So Zeus is like the most common way this card gets outed, but if your opponent is like trying to destroy this card, obviously having the Wings is really good because it basically blanks one of their spell or traps that tries to destroy this card. So that's really cool, and this play could give you quite a lot of follow-up as well, because basically we still have a loaded graveyard. So that's how you can kind of go off with 3 summons from your hand, and it's really good. So let's go ahead and get into the next test hand. Okay, so for this hand we actually have considerably less gas than the previous hands just because we really only have access to 2 summons, but that's also fine because it will allow us to go off pretty hard as well. So we'll just go ahead and special summon out the Forward, then normal summon the Cloak. Then we can go for the Cherubini here, and before activating Cherubini's effect, to ensure that it stays around, we'll go ahead and set the Imperm. Cherubini will dump the Torn Scales, and now we can go ahead and activate the Cloak. Cloak can grab us a Boots because now we'll go ahead and revive the Torn Scales, and we can go ahead and use the Torn Scales effect to dump a Fog Blade from our hand as well as a Ragged Gloves, so that we can set up our graveyard a little bit more. Now we can go ahead and special summon the Boots, and then we'll go into our first Leviair, and then we'll revive the Ancient Cloak from the banished pile. Now we're free to go into Rusty, and then we'll go ahead and activate the Gloves to get a wings into the graveyard, and the wings can bring back the cloak, and cloak can activate now and give this 800 attack once again. And then we'll go for the fog blade to bring back the boots so that we can go into here. I actually do go into the Moose Rhythm just to kind of show off, what just to show off that option. And then we'll go into the future play. So here, this is going to be just about our end board. Obviously, we can go ahead and use the boost to grab another fog blade so that we have more disruption on our opponent's turn. But basically, with this hand, we basically didn't have access to the third Xyz monster because our hand didn't really allow for it. But having the Utopic Future is a negate, and we do have quite a bit of back row set up that are, each one of these back row is a negate. So we'll have 3 negates here, and then obviously the negate here. So that's pretty good. And Utopic Draco Future can't be destroyed by battle or card effects, I believe. So it's quite pesky for our opponents to out, and it also takes control of whatever monster that they try to activate. So that's pretty cool as well. Okay, so this hand doesn't actually have a Phantomites monster in it, which is a little bit unfortunate, but we're kind of saved by the fact that we don't actually have to normal summon either of these to get them onto the board. So go ahead and special summon the Junk Forward, activate the Danger Tsuchinoko, which will ditch the Dark Ruler and special summon itself, and draw us a card. So we'll draw into a Chalice, which isn't really going to help us extend it all here, but it's a nice effect negation to have, I guess. And then we'll go ahead and go into Cherubini. Now, Cherubini can send the Cloak because we haven't normal summoned yet, so this can easily just fetch us a Scales, which is really good. So now we'll get that Scales, and we'll go ahead and normal summon that Scales. We won't use its effect yet because none of these cards are really doing anything in the graveyard for us. We'd much rather have a Phantomites trap in the graveyard, and we'll get that eventually. So we'll go ahead and fire off the Rusty, and then Rusty will dump the gloves and will set us a wing. I kind of went for the wing here because we have plenty of effect negation in our hand, and having a wing is really good so that we can kind of protect our monsters. So now we'll go ahead and use the gloves effect to dump the boots into the graveyard, and now boots can go ahead and, excuse me, before we use boots, Scales will trigger off of the gloves being banished, and so now we can actually go for the boots after we special summon the Scales, and grab us another wings so that we can actually discard it off of the Torn Scales. Now we'll discard that and send a Cloak to the graveyard, which we kind of already used all the Phantomites, so yeah, basically we're just dumping it in there for another name at this point, and kind of a follow-up for our next turn. So now we have our 2 level 3s on the board. At this point, we're just going to go for Break Sword because we're not actually going to have access to another way of making a rank 3. So we're not going to have like access to Utopic Future or anything like that. So we're just going to use the Rusty effect to pop the Break Sword, and then use Break Sword's effect to go for the Evil Swarm Nightmare, which is fine because this card's pretty disruptive, and hopefully the amount of disruption we'll have in our back row will kind of be enough to get us into our next turn so that we can, go on the aggressive and make some more plays. But yeah, that's for a hand that doesn't really, this test hand kind of shows how you can still play with like a suboptimal hand and still end up halfway decent. So yeah, let's go into one more test hand. Okay, so this last test hand is I kind of want to just show you the worst case of a playable hand. So basically, you're just going to go ahead and special summon the Junk Forward and normal summon the Kagamuchanite. You could do normal summon Junk Forward, special Kagamuchanite. It doesn't really matter, but this way you don't actually start any chains. So it's probably a little bit better. So basically, you're just going to go into Cherubini. Cherubini will pitch the Conjurer, and since our hand is all spells, we are unfortunately just going to have to set all our spells here. This hand is actually pretty decent going second, but going first, obviously it's not great because Dark Ruler is not doing anything for you. So yeah, we'll go ahead and set all those. Special summon the Conjurer after that. Unfortunately, we are going to lose the Conjurer because it will banish itself when it leaves the field. Then we'll go into Rusty. Rusty will dump a Boots so that we can get another Fog Blade. We'll set the Fog Blade off the Rusty effect. We'll go ahead and banish the Boots and get another Fog Blade and set it, and this way we actually have the one Fog Blade here, one Fog Blade here, and Forbidden Chalice. We do have talents if our opponent tries to interrupt us. We cannot still activate it because it's not a quick play spell. So yeah, basically we'll have three interruptions on our opponent's turn, and hopefully that's enough to kind of get us through. So yeah, that's not a very optimal hand, but we do, also we can kind of psych out our opponent here as well. Opponents get really scared when you set 5. So yeah, that's it for the combo here. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. I do hope you found that helpful, and if you did like the video, make sure you show it by hitting the like button and maybe even leaving a comment or hitting the subscribe button. But with that, I am going to leave you with a peace out. Have a nice day. Goodbye.